It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend away, just me and my wife, heading up to our cabin in the mountains to disconnect for a few days. We packed light, except for one locked rifle case, which we always bring when we're off-grid. Nothing unusual for us. But the moment we stepped out of the truck, our quiet little escape turned into a scene straight out of a bad drama. Enter the HOA Karen. You know the type, clipboard in hand, nose turned up, convinced she runs the world because she chairs a neighborhood committee. She spotted my wife unloading the case and stormed over like she was about to make a citizen's arrest. Didn't ask any questions, didn't say hello, just jumped straight to, "You can't bring weapons here." My wife stayed calm, didn't even react. But Karen was already dialing the cops, claiming she felt threatened and that someone was armed in a residential area. Now, here's the part that really made things interesting. When the sheriff arrived and asked a few basic questions, my wife calmly pulled out her eye. Dion said two words that changed everything: Special Forces. That's when Karen stopped talking, froze mid-sentence. Suddenly, all that fake authority drained right off her face. But what happened after that? Let's just say things got even more awkward and a whole lot more revealing. Stick around, because this story takes a turn nobody, especially Karen, was ready for. The deputy gave a nod after glancing at my wife's credentials, then turned to Karen and asked her to explain why she made the call. That's when it got uncomfortable. Karen's confidence started cracking. "I didn't know she was military," she muttered, suddenly unsure of herself. But that wasn't the point. The point was, she jumped to conclusions the moment she saw a woman carrying a gun case. Never mind that we owned the cabin. We were following every law, and the case never even left my wife's hands. The sheriff asked a few more, questioned standard stuff, but Karen kept deflecting. Said we looked suspicious. Said she didn't recognize us. But we've owned the place for years, and most of the neighbors know us well. Karen only moved in 3 months ago and had been on some self-appointed mission to clean up what she called unruly behavior. A veteran carrying a legally owned rifle in the woods that somehow counted in her book. My wife, still silent through most of this, finally spoke. Calm, firm, she explained that she served overseas in combat, that the rifle was locked and registered, and that we were headed to a private range down the road the next morning. The air got real quiet after that. Even the deputy gave a respectful nod. But that was just the beginning. Because the moment Karen stepped away, something even more unexpected came to light. Something that made her nervous all over again. Karen hadn't walked 10 steps when the deputy's radio crackled. Another call had come in, this time from the HOA president. Apparently, Karen had been stirring up trouble across the neighborhood since she moved in. Complaints about unregistered vehicles, flag displays, even kids playing too loudly near her property. The deputy raised an eyebrow, clearly recognizing a pattern. Still, he stayed professional. My wife and I exchanged a look. This wasn't just about rifles. This was about control. Back at the cabin, things got even weirder. A notice was taped to our front door, an HOA violation for unauthorized activity on the property. Karen must have filed it earlier. My wife peeled it off calmly, but I could see the frustration building behind her eyes. She'd seen combat zones more peaceful than this. Meanwhile, our neighbor Jake stopped by. He'd lived on the road for over 2 decades and didn't mince words. "You're not the first folks Karen's tried to run off." Last month, she reported an Army vet for flying his service flag. That hit a nerve for my wife. She wasn't the type to seek conflict, but disrespect for service. That cut deep as night fell. Motion lights flicked on around our porch. My wife double-checked the locks, then quietly loaded the rifle only as a precaution. Tension buzzed in the air, not from fear, but from a deep sense of injustice. We weren't just dealing with an angry neighbor. We were standing up against someone who had made it her mission to bully anyone she couldn't control. The next morning, a letter slid under our door certified by the HOA. Karen had officially filed a motion to have us removed from the community, citing threatening behavior and dangerous military equipment. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so outrageous. My wife, calm as ever, folded the letter and tucked it into her duffel bag. "Let them come," she said, not in anger, but with quiet certainty. Word spread fast around the neighborhood. Some neighbors began to distance themselves, but others came forward. Jake knocked again, this time with two more folks who had similar stories. Karen had tried to force a retired firefighter to repaint his cabin and had screamed at a single mom for letting her son ride a bike in the shared space. This wasn't a one-time flare-up. It was a pattern. By mid-afternoon, HOA board members arrived at our property, clipboards in hand. Karen right behind them, practically beaming. She pointed at everything: the gun cases, the Jeep, even our dog's leash, like it was a hazard. My wife stood quietly on the porch in her plain black tee, arms folded, not saying a word, just as they began reading the formal complaint out loud. A black SUV pulled up. A man in uniform stepped out, broad shoulders, service stripes on his sleeves, and the kind of calm authority that made everyone stop talking. Karen's grin disappeared. He walked straight to my wife, offered a crisp salute, and said just loud enough for the group to hear, "Command heard about this, ma'am. We've got your back." The HOA board looked stunned. Karen's expression shifted from smug to pale in seconds. The man in uniform, clearly high-ranking, turned to the group and asked calmly, "Did any of you verify the legality of the complaint?" Before showing up, no one answered. Karen tried to speak, but he cut her off gently. "This woman has served with distinction in special forces. She's decorated, cleared, and trained beyond anything you'll ever read in your bylaws." The silence that followed was thick, but then came the twist. Another HOA member, quiet guy named Dennis, who had barely spoken during past meetings, stepped forward and cleared his throat. "I'm going to be honest," he said. "I've been getting pressured by Karen for weeks. She threatened to report me for compliance failure if I didn't support her complaints. I didn't agree with any of this, but I was scared she'd come after my wife's business." All eyes turned to Karen. She stammered, tried to play it off, but Dennis pulled out his phone. Voicemail recordings, text screenshots, threats, it was all there. What had started as a noise complaint had snowballed into full-on intimidation. And now the HOA board realized they hadn't just walked into a property dispute. They were standing in the middle of a power play that could blow up their credibility. Karen backed up a step, suddenly unsure of her footing. But the uniformed man wasn't done. He turned to her slowly and said, "You didn't just mess with the wrong neighbor. You messed with the entire chain of command." Karen looked like she'd just been hit with a shockwave. Her eyes darted from Dennis to the man in uniform, then back to the board, as if searching for someone to defend her. But no one spoke. Not a single person backed her. Even the board members shifted awkwardly, clearly realizing they'd followed her lead without ever asking questions. The officer stepped forward again, handing a sealed envelope to the head of the HOA. "This is a formal legal notice," he said. "The Department of Defense is now aware that a service member's reputation was misused and targeted without cause. You're free to enforce community guidelines, but you're not free to weaponize them." Then came the final twist. My wife, who'd remained calm and quiet through the entire mess, finally stepped forward. She looked Karen straight in the eye and said, "I've served in combat zones, led missions, I've been shot at more times than I can count. But I've never seen someone misuse power this recklessly, this carelessly, over something as simple as a rifle case." Karen, completely deflated, tried to walk away, but the deputy from the previous day appeared behind the SUV. Actually, ma'am, he said, holding up a small notepad, we're going to need a formal statement from you regarding the false police report. You'll want to come with us. As they walked her to the car, you could hear the mountain wind pick up. Again? My wife turned, nodded to the officer, and said, "Time to enjoy the cabin in peace." With Karen gone and the HOA rattled, things finally settled down. The officer stayed for a few minutes, shared contact info with my wife, and assured us the false report would be handled properly. Dennis quietly apologized again, then asked if we'd consider attending the next HOA meeting, said they needed someone like her to help restore some balance. My wife just smiled and said, "Let's see how quiet the woods stay first." The rest of the weekend was exactly what we'd hoped for. No more knocks on the door. No clipboard patrols. Just long hikes, hot coffee, and the peaceful crackle of a fire. My wife even made it out to the range the next morning, alone, steady hands and all. When she returned, she laid her gear down on the porch, looked out over the tree line, and said, "Funny how the loudest ones are always the least prepared." Word eventually spread across the neighborhood. A few more neighbors came by to thank us not just for standing up to Karen, but for reminding them that respect isn't something you demand with a rulebook, something you earn with honesty.com and courage.